Good afternoon. I am Sue Reeves, and I am the Regent of Lynchburg Chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution. I'd like to welcome you all here this afternoon. This is wonderful. What a great turnout we've got. We are going to rededicate this World War I memorial that you see here, that our chapter placed here in 1936, to honor those men from the Lynchburg area who gave the ultimate sacrifice in World War I. This past summer, we were able to have the memorial cleaned and refurbished, thanks to the generosity of several local veterans organizations. And those organizations are the Military Order of the World Wars, which was begun by General Blackjack Pershing after World War I, the Military Order of the Purple Heart, the Vietnam Veterans of America, and the Lynchburg Area Veterans Council. Would the representatives of those organizations please stand and be recognized? Thank you very much. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our honored guests. Please hold your applause until all have been introduced. If you will, please stand as I call your name. Mrs. Judith Joy Serber, State Regent, Virginia Daughters of the American Revolution. The Honorable Bob Goodlatte, U.S. Representative for the 6th Virginia Congressional District. The Honorable Mark J. Peake, Virginia State Senator for the 22nd Senate District. The Honorable Mrs. Joan Foster, Mayor of Lynchburg. Sheriff Don Sloan, City of Lynchburg Sheriff. And Mrs. Bethany Harrison, newly elected Commonwealth's Attorney for the City of Lynchburg. Thank you all for coming. At this time, I would like to introduce Miss Katie Thomas, a member of Lynchburg Chapter, who will read the poem In Flanders Fields by John McCrae. Katie?
In Flanders fields the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row that mark our place. And in the sky, the lark, still bravely singing, flies scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, and saw sunset glow. Loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you, from failing hands, we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If you break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields.
Thank you, Katie. I will now ask Mrs. Millie I. Casey, State Chaplain, Virginia DAR, to lead us in a prayer of remembrance. Mrs. Casey.
Thank you, Sue. What an honor it is to be invited to attend and participate in this World War I Memorial Rededication. As you know, this year marks the 100th anniversary when the United States entered World War I on April the 6th, 1917. Which ended on November the 11th, 1918. Over 100,000 Virginians served. Of that number, over 4,000 gave their lives. We should never forget these dedicated service members whose commitment in a new kind of warfare forever changed the world. May we pray together. O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come. We praise you for your presence with us today and with those who served our country. We give special thanks for American heroes who from our beginning as a nation have paid the supreme sacrifice. Our hearts are filled with gratitude for those to whom we owe so much. Help us to show our appreciation by loving our country, by supporting its Constitution, by obeying its laws, and by respecting its flag. As we gather today, may we not take our freedoms lightly, including even this right to gather as a group and the privilege to pray together. Give us grateful hearts for our wonderful heritage. Help us to realize our responsibility to keep the fires of patriotism glowing brightly. Amen.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Casey. Now I would ask the following people to come forward and help unveil our memorial. Mrs. Serber, Congressman Goodlatte, Senator Peake, Mayor Foster, Dr. Michael Oken, Mr. Gary Witt, and Mr. David Stokes. And the veterans at Mrs. Serber, which was over on this side. All right, go ahead and pull that ribbon. And if the rest of you would take a piece and pull it. Now that the memorial has taps. Now that taps has been sounded, we will depart this location, and I hope you will join us as we reconvene at the Lynchburg Museum in the old courthouse on Court Street at 2:45 for the continuation of our ceremonies and a reception. Thank you again for coming to this part of our ceremony, and I hope to see you all in a few minutes at the Lynchburg Museum.
Good job.
If we could begin the second portion of our ceremony. For those of you who were not at the unveiling earlier, I would like to introduce myself. I am Sue Reeves. I am the Regent of Lynchburg Chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution. In 1936, our chapter placed the memorial on the grounds of the present E.C. Glass High School in honor of those men from Lynchburg who gave the ultimate sacrifice in World War I. There are 42 names on that memorial. This past summer, we were able to have the memorial cleaned and refurbished thanks to the generosity of several local veterans organizations. Those organizations are the Military Order of the World Wars, which was begun by Blackjack Pershing after World War I, the Military Order of the Purple Heart, the Vietnam Veterans of America, and Lynchburg Area Veterans Council. Would the representatives of those organizations please stand and be recognized? Thank you very much. Now it is my pleasure to introduce again our honored guests. Please hold your applause until all have been introduced. If you will, please stand as I call your name. Mrs. Judith Joy Serber, State Regent, Virginia Daughters of the American Revolution. The Honorable Mark J. Peake, Virginia State Senator for the 22nd Senate District. The the Honorable Mrs. Joan Foster, Mayor of Lynchburg. Thank you very much for being here. Additionally, we have a number of state DAR officers with us today. Again, please stand as I call your name, and I ask the audience to please hold your applause until all have been introduced. Mrs. Becky Rogers, State Vice Regent. Mrs. Millie Casey, State Chaplain. Dr. Sherry Edwards, State Recording Secretary. Mrs. Laurie Nesbitt, State Organizing Secretary. Mrs. Cindy Fine, State Treasurer. Mrs. Holly Lynn Schmidt, she is not here. Mrs. Courtney Stanley, Assistant State Treasurer. Thank you all, ladies, for coming. We also have some District 3 DAR officers present, and I would like to acknowledge them as well. Please stand as I call your name. Mrs. Rachel Shenago, District Parliamentarian. Thank you. And we have Mrs. Sharon Steo, who is District 6 Director. Thank you, ladies, for coming. Do we have any other chapter regents here who have come from a distance? No. Some were going to come, but the weather may have prevented them. We are also honored to have among us some descendants of the men who are named on our memorial plaque. Would those people please stand if they are here? Do we have any? Okay. Well, we had hoped that they were going to be able to be here with us. I would like to give a special thanks, though, to two people. Mr. John Mason, who could not be with us today. He's a Vietnam veteran and a volunteer at Old City Cemetery. And Mrs. Laura Morrison, who is a prospective member of Lynchburg chapter. They spent many hours locating these descendants so that we could invite them today to our program. Would you stand up, Laura? Thank you so much. Now it is with some great pleasure that I introduce our speaker. Mrs. Laura Wilson is the curator of this Lynchburg Museum, and she has put together the World War I exhibit upstairs that I hope you will take advantage of while you're here today. It's on the second floor. She has agreed to speak to us today about life in Lynchburg during World War I. She's been curator here since 2013, and prior to that, she was curator at Marshall Museum and the Stonewall Jackson House in Lexington, Virginia. So it is with great pleasure that I introduce Laura Wilson.
Well, good afternoon, and welcome to the Lynchburg Museum. You'll have to excuse me if I'm a little hoarse today. I was outside all day yesterday morning at the community market. We had a World War I food challenge event that was well attended, and I'm a little hoarse because of it. As World War I drew to a close and he mustered out of service, Lynchburg native Aubrey Harwood filed his military service questionnaire. In response to the question, what was your attitude towards military service in general and towards your call in particular, he responded, it was my privilege and my duty. Harwood's sense of privilege and duty was not a product of the war, but something with which Lynchburg residents were quite familiar. In the years prior to the war, a number of improvements and innovations came to Lynchburg. The creation of municipal parks. We were the second city in Virginia to do this behind Richmond. Electric power, a trolley system, and our first general hospital. Pedlar Reservoir had been built, which greatly reduced death and illness caused by unclean water from the James River. The Rivermont Bridge was constructed, which opened up great tracts of land for residential development. The Academy of Music hosted international musicians and top performers from across the country. Automobiles, telephones, and motion pictures were part of everyday life in the Hill City. When the United States officially entered the war in 1917, some 2,800 citizens from Lynchburg answered the call for military service out of a population of approximately 30,000. Many of these men were from families with whom you may be familiar: Craighill, Barksdale, Thornhill, Glass, Craddock, Terry, and Edmonds, just to name a few. There were also men with whom you may be less familiar. Men such as Royal Fowler, who served in the 808th Pioneer Infantry, a group of non-combatant African Americans charged with delivering supplies in France, or Harry Reed, who reached the rank of sergeant before returning home to start his pharmacy on 5th Street. Most of Lynchburg's men volunteered to aid the Allies before the national draft took place in March of 1918. Garnet Duguid joined the Red Cross and drove an ambulance in France. Joseph Brown joined the Marines in December of 1917. He was the first Lynchburg soldier killed in France. To foster this sense of volunteerism, Charles Guggenheimer, owner of Lynchburg's largest department store, promised to rehire anyone who left his employment to serve in the Army or Navy. Before the war, National Guard units from Lynchburg, the Home Guard, and the Musketeers were called to service in Mexico and Texas during Pancho Villa's raid against American towns. These units formed the 116th Regiment of the 29th Infantry Division, known as the Blue and Gray, and the 317th Regiment of the 80th Infantry Division, known as the Blue Ridge. Another Lynchburg National Guard unit, the Shawnee Rifles, became part of the 42nd, or Rainbow Division. Men from Lynchburg trained at Fort Myer and at Camp Lee near Petersburg, at Camp Dix in New Jersey, and at Camp Jackson in South Carolina. Naval training took place in Norfolk and at Parris Island, South Carolina. From these training camps, men were transported by train to eastern seaports where they bounded ships for France. In the fall of 1918, men from Central Virginia participated in the American campaigns at San Miel, along the Meuse River, and in the Argonne Forest. By the close of the war, in November 1918, 99 years ago yesterday, over 50 men from Lynchburg lay dead from illness or injury. Among Lynchburg's fallen is aviator George Preston Glenn, who died in a German prisoner of war camp after being shot down on July 20th, 1918. Lynchburg Regional Airport was originally named Preston Glenn in his honor when it opened in 1931. Also included in that list is William Neubauer, who in his last letter home to his family wrote, "I may be foolish to write this, but everyone around me is doing the same thing, and if by any ill luck I should be taken, you will at least have the last word, as it were. I want you all to know that I haven't experienced the least bit of fear, and I know that God is with me all the while. I know, Mother, that if anyone's prayers were answered, yours are sure to be among the few, for I know I am blessed with the truest, noblest, best mother in the world, to say nothing of the rest of the family." A few words about my little part in this game. It is the most wonderful part any one man can play. To command a company and have full sway of some 230 men in this battle for right is all one healthy man could wish for. And if I should fall, I will have done my part as every true American should have, and in doing so will reflect credit upon our name. He was killed in action on October 4th, mere weeks before the end of the war. While Lynchburg citizens were actively engaged in fighting across Europe, people at home were just as motivated to support the war effort. As men volunteered for military service, the women of Lynchburg took their place in business, industry, healthcare, and agriculture. They took jobs at Craddock Terry and Jobbers Overall Factory. Existing factories were pushed to capacity and paid workers overtime to meet war demands. Spurred on by their patriotic women, Lynchburg residents consistently met demands for Liberty Bonds and Red Cross drives. In October of 1918, the city met its goal of $3 million for the fourth Liberty loan in 1 week. That's over $15 million today. While the women certainly aided in the physical production of war goods, they also aided in less tangible ways. As Lynchburg was a major railroad hub, many soldiers passed through town on their way to eastern seaports before going on to France. For many, this was their first time from home and their first time on a train. Sensing a need for hospitality and comfort, a group of ladies made sandwiches and baked goods for the soldiers. The women would take their goods to Kemper Street Station to feed them as they came into town. Led by Mrs. Charles McLeod and Miss Lucille McWayne, this informal kindness grew into the creation of a Red Cross canteen that served thousands of soldiers. As the men arrived day and night, they were greeted with food, sandwiches, coffee, and tea, personal items such as cigarettes, postcards, and stamps, and if they had enough time, a hot shower. The canteen served upwards of 3,000 soldiers per day. For this hospitality, Lynchburg proudly became known as Lunchburg. In January 1918, the Spanish flu swept across the United States and Europe. It struck Lynchburg in the final weeks of the war. On October 11th, the health officer of the city, Dr. Perro, advised to all dentists, bank tellers, streetcar conductors, soft drink dispensers, waiters in hotels and restaurants, and barbers that owing to the epidemic of grippe that was in the city, to wear gauze masks in front of the mouth and nose while on duty. He cautioned that when the masks were removed, they had to be immediately boiled or burned. By that time, more than 1,000 people in the city were believed to be ill with the flu. At month's end, more than 200 people were dead. Worldwide, the flu killed at least 50 million people, 3 times the number of people who perished in the Great War. Similarly, the flu killed more Lynchburg residents than the war. Schools, churches, and all public gathering places were closed for almost 40 days as doctors and city officials sought to contain the epidemic. The quarantine was not lifted until November 10th, one day before the armistice was signed. News of the armistice, of the end of the war to end all wars, reached Lynchburg at 6 a.m. on November 11th, 1918. People on their morning commute were greeted by the ringing of church bells and the sounds of factory bells and train whistles. As the news spread, thousands of people gathered on Main Street. The Daily Advance estimated 15,000 people, half of Lynchburg's population, flocked downtown to celebrate. Businesses were forced to close as workers left to join the festivities. The students and faculty of Randolph-Macon Women's College paraded from Rivermont Avenue to the steps of this building, where they performed a concert of patriotic songs. The German Kaiser was burned in effigy at the Oddfellows home, while children danced around the fire. The party reportedly lasted 18 hours. This was understandable, as citizens could finally relax from their 40-day quarantine and the prolonged sense of urgency to meet the demands of wartime production and military service. The next day, this editorial appeared in the news. Those boys of ours, those boys in khaki over there, how promptly they responded to the country's call for military service, how willingly they submitted themselves to the rigorous training in the arts of war, how readily they flung themselves into the bloody battles raging there, how gallantly they fought, how uncomplainingly they suffered, how proudly so many of them died. We owe them much. We owe them a debt of gratefulness that can never be repaid. But to the extent that we can discharge this obligation, let us never weary of the task. As we are gathered here today for the rededication of the memorial in front of E.C. Glass High School, I want to thank you for your commitment to honor those who gave so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. Oh, you're a little taller than I am. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful talk. I think everybody learned a little bit more about our home city here in Lynchburg. And I want to thank you for helping me plan this event, and I hope we have a chance to do something together again soon in the future. We now are going to hear from one of the soldiers whose name is on the memorial. He is being portrayed by Mr. Greg Ritchie. His interpretation will be followed by the sounding of taps, which will signify the end of this program. To preserve the solemnity of the occasion, I would ask that you not applaud after taps has been sounded. I do hope you will stay, however, and enjoy our refreshments and take some time to go upstairs. If you have not seen the World War I exhibit up on the second floor, it is wonderful. And as long as you're here, take advantage and go up and see it. I need to remind you that all refreshments need to stay here in this room, and the museum does close at 4 p.m. On behalf of Lynchburg Chapter, I would like to thank everyone for coming, and now it's time for us to meet Private William Harrison Brooks.
Hi, my name is Private William Harrison Brooks of the 82nd Division, but you can call me Harry. Now I'm going to cut right to the chase. I never got married, I had no kid, never even fell in love. No, I did have a mighty fine son with a real good man one time. But that's for another day. Wait, I did love a dog once, and hell of a hound named Lucky. Unluckiest down 11 at sea, but a fine hunting dog he was. Why, he'd catch a fox all by himself, not run in the pack, nothing. But I shot him. Oh, don't go getting ideas. It was an accident, for Pete's sake. I was taking aim at a nice 12 pointer on a trick, and my gun went off, and the poor old Lucky took a massive amount of buckshot right in the head. You know, he just yelped a little. It was one half of his hindquarters ate off. He kept trying to run down that there. That fool dog never did know when to stop hunting. But I admire that kind of spirit in them. Poor person, I guess. But yet, never loved no one. Never got a chance to before I died in the most honorable way a man can. In service to my country. The one true love of my life. Mustered over Camp Virginia, August 1918, joined up with the 330th Infantry, and quick when you could pick off 2 doves, I was off to France to fight with the Allies in the Great War. Now, I was around guns all my life, so I know a lot about it. One of the things that helped over there in all that fighting. You see, when I was a greener boy, he was scared of all those bullets whizzing around, flinching, crouching, always thinking they was going to get hit. But the more experienced men, like me, we knew where a bullet was coming from and where it was going to make its mark by the way it crackled. As soon as it left the barrel, it crackled right on one ear and the other, so you could hear more in your left ear than your right. You knew you were okay. And so it was, one day in November, meet another private, Billy. We're doing some recon along the railroads. Right along the Meuse River, near Belly. All of a sudden, we come upon this clear, and we was both plain struck dumb by how beautiful everything was. Now, it weren't peaceful, mind you. There was still all sorts of fighting between our boys and the Huns, just over the hillside. But there, in that clearing, it's like God Almighty froze everything so we could admire all that He created. For the first time since I've been away, I was owning something terrible. The leaves over there were just starting to change color. You know how we get in the fall fields? Way off in the middle of that gunfire, I heard a dog barking. I swear I thought, well, hell, there's Lucky running down some more rabbit. All the gunpowder in the air and the smell of smoke stinging my nostrils. Well, it made me think on Thanksgiving turkey. Mama's cooking wasn't too good. Just as I was cursing, a tear started to come to my eye, I heard it. In this ear, just as much as this one. A split second later, I was shot. Like a stupid digger. I thought sat there and admired silly old orange and yellow leaves. Oh, damn snipers got me. Well, Bill told me up off the track, said he was going to go get help, and that everything was going to be okay. Just hold on. And then, I was alone. Don't know when I got shot. Didn't have no timepiece on me. But I do know when I died. Just a little after 11 a.m. It was for the first time as long as I could remember. I couldn't hear no more gunfire. What I did hear was the cheering of all the men in the woods around me. As I took my last breath, the war that had raged for more than 4 years was over. See, on the day of my death, November 11th, 1918, at 5 o'clock in the morning, an armistice was signed between the Central Powers and the Allies, which would end the Great War. At 11 a.m., all fighting would cease. But until that time, the generals were bound and determined to gain favorable position, just in case that old ceasefire failed, up until the very last minute. So, even though the war was technically over, just like old Lucky, no one knew when to stop hunting. Until that was 11 a.m. When I heard all that cheering, I knew they'd set down their weapons and were heading on home. Except for me. I was buried over in France and stayed there nearly 3 years till my family could bring me back. And here I am at last. I'm real sore I don't get to hunt or shoot nothing no more. Real happy I don't have to eat no more mama's turkey. And I sure do miss my dog. But at least I will always be home for fall.